Hey guys, welcome back. Thanks for coming back for part 2 of New Camera What's Next. In this episode we're going to be talking about aperture. The first one we talked about shutter speed. I hope you went away and tried some of those things we talked about and it gives you a better understanding of shutter speed. If you've got any questions, don't hesitate to put them in the comments section below and I'll be happy to answer them for you. This one we're going to talk about aperture and its effect on your picture taking. And very basically, I've got an old lens here that I wanted to share with you. The aperture is very basic to understand. It's basically just the hole that opens and closes to let a certain amount of light in. You can see there that is f22, and then if I open it all the way up you can see the big hole there is all the way open, so it lets more light in. If I just close it down and you can see all the way closed, it little bit of light in. Now all lenses are going to have aperture, except for a pinhole camera, which is just one aperture, it's just a pinhole. But just about every camera on the planet has adjustable aperture so that you can let the different amounts of light onto the film plane or to the sensor surface. This one is an older lens. That's, you can see on the side here, it's still got all the f-stops written along the top there. Most of the newer lenses don't have that. It's normally on the digital dial on the top. This is from an old Nikon film camera. But you can see that it goes from 2.8 to 22. It's quite simple really. All you've got to remember is the smaller the number, the bigger the opening. And the greater than, so that's going to be your bigger opening there, that's f2.8, and then the bigger the number, f22, that's going to be your smallest opening, and then everything in between is going to be a variant of that. Okay, quite literally we could call it quits and discuss nothing further. It's that simple. It really is just about the size of the opening within the lens and nothing more than that. But having said that, there are some different things that we can do with this opening. Not only is it going to change the amount of light that comes into the camera to hit the film plane or sensor, but there's also some creative things we can do with that aperture. If we take it past its simplest form, what else can we do with the aperture to help us in our creative endeavors to take great photos? Look at the pictures behind me, for example. The camera that is shooting this right now is set to a really wide open aperture. Remember we said a small number, so there's a big hole in that lens. Basically it's shooting at f2 right now, and just to exaggerate it a little bit, if I put my hand in closer you can see how the background just completely blurs out. See how clear my hand is? Well, it's no clearer, it's just that the background is so blurry that it makes it stand out even more. That's a classic example of how we can use aperture to help tell stories and try and highlight what we're actually trying to shoot. Another example would be go to a sporting event. If you've got, everybody's seen lenses like this happens to be a 300mm Canon. Very fast lens, hence the reason the size of the opening there. It's a 2.8, which for a super telephoto is very fast, and this will blur that background even more, in an incredible amount. If you look at any sports images that you ever see in the newspapers or if in magazines, the key is not to get the people in the background or what's going on in the background to be distracting to the image. So if you can blur that background out and you've got a guy running through 10 others with a ball and just he is in focus, that's where it really makes that picture jump off the page. So that would be an example. You've also got an example where you could go the other extreme, where you have a really small aperture. And what that does for us is it makes a much greater distance in focus. So if I was shooting a landscape, for example, I wanted everything from very, very close to me and very, very far away to be in focus, then I would shoot in f11, f16, something like that. You could even shoot in f22. Basically, the opposite ends of the aperture will give you complete opposite effects. If you go for the widest open, then you're going to get a very shallow depth of field. What is depth of field? Depth of field is simply what part of the picture is in focus, from what distance to what distance is in focus. That's your depth of field. So that will give you a really shallow depth of field. If you go to the other end, or if you think of the smallest hole, then it's going to give you a massive depth of field. There's going to be a huge amount of depth of field, from all the way from maybe, if you're using a super wide lens, from 6 feet in front of you all the way out to infinity, infinity being as far as you can see. Do the same rules apply for every lens? Well, they do in principle, but slightly different variations. The lens in front of me is a 28mm lens, so although the background is slightly blurry, I could get a much greater effect if I put a bigger lens on there, maybe a 55 or an 85 or a 200, and took the camera way further away. The longer the focal length of lens, the shorter or shallower the depth of field. And we'll go into this in more detail when we talk about lenses, but just suffice to say that it's not the same for every lens. The principle's the same. The bigger the hole, the smaller the depth of field. The smaller the hole, the bigger the depth of field. That principle is still the same. This is something that I think everybody should know. The smallest number and the greatest number on each lens they own. It can be slightly different. Normally it's around f22 on the higher end, but on the lower end it's always different. And without going into too much detail on the lower end, we're going to talk about that in lenses, but you should learn the basic numbers. The reason you should learn the basic numbers is because every time you have one stop or one click in between each number here, it doubles the amount of light that you need to take the same picture. So it's kind of important. 2.8 to 4, between 2.8 and 4, f4 would take twice the amount of light than 2.8 to take the same picture. If I go up to 5.6, the same thing again. From f4 to 5.6, twice the amount of light. Now there's kind of weird numbers, so that's why I say you should learn them. If you went 2.8, 4, 5.6, 8, 11, f16, f22, just memorize it because it's helpful. All lenses are going to have these f numbers on them. It's really just how low that they will go, but it's definitely worth memorizing because they're odd numbers, really. Okay, we talked a little bit about how each number affects the final image, whether you've got a really shallow depth of field or a really expansive depth of field. What about if you go in the middle, right in the middle of the scale? Normally for most lenses that's around f8. Well, that's quite simply put your sweet spot of the lens. It's where you're going to get the most quality out of that lens. So if you're going for 100% quality, then go to the middle part of the lens and it's going to be absolutely outstanding. Okay guys, just like we did with the shutter speed exercise, we're going to set one here for the aperture. I think this will demonstrate really easily and clearly what aperture does when you're taking pictures. What I want you to do is set your camera to aperture priority, which on a Sony is A, and I believe the exact same thing for a Nikon. And then for a Canon, it's AV. So you're going to set it to the AV marking on there. And basically all you're going to do is select your aperture. I'm going to get you to put some items in a row. Doesn't matter what they are. You could use 2-litre bottles of Coke. You could use fence posts on a picket fence. The important thing is that you know the distance between each piece. And what I want you to do is let's say you use 2-litre bottles of Coke, set them up 2 feet apart and maybe do 10 of them. And then what I want to do is you're going to look down that line of objects, whatever you pick for objects, and you're basically going to pick a shutter speed, take a picture, keep the camera in the same position all the time. Take a picture, switch the aperture a couple of stops, take another picture, switch the aperture another couple of stops. By a couple of stops I mean go from 2.8 to f5.6, from 5.6 to f8 to f16, something like that. And I want you to look at the results. Look back at the results and see how much is actually in focus. Once you've done that through one time, then you can do it at different points. You could do it at different focal points. You could focus on the object nearest to you and then go and take a couple of shots like that. Then try focusing on the object furthest away from you and take a couple of shots like that. You can get as involved as you really want to with it, but it's really just so that you can understand the correlation between your aperture and the depth of field and everything that's in focus. So go ahead, give it a try. If you've got any questions, don't hesitate to leave them in the comments below and I'll be happy to answer them for you. Okay guys, that's it for this week. Please like and subscribe. I'm going to be putting out a video every Friday, so keep a lookout for a video every Friday. Till then, next time.